Hi everyone, and welcome to the monthly video in our series Relationship Success Support. We do these videos once a month. Usually it's the first Thursday of the month, but this month's video we had to postpone it until today, so that's why we're doing it now. We will be talking for about 40 minutes, and we encourage you to join us and participate with any questions or comments that you have for the panel that is with us today. And the topic of this specific hangout is hooking up culture. The culture of hooking up and having, so to speak, casual sex, or even looking for a relationship through hooking up. Hooking up, I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it is described as sort of looking for casual sex or casually having sex, mostly connected to youth culture, or in the US it could be like college culture. I'm sure that we'll go more into detail about what it actually means and what is involved with hooking up, because we will be looking at what drives this culture from a psychological and personal perspective, and how the consequences that it has on us as individuals. And as always, we have our resident relationship expert, as I call her, Cerise Pullman from South Africa. Hi, Cerise.
Hi, everyone.
And today we have our guest expert of relationships, which is my partner in crime, Victor.
Hello, everyone.
And we're coming to you here from Sweden. So let's get straight into it. And as I mentioned before, if you do want to ask a question about hooking up, if that's something that you've struggled with, or if you have any experiences with hooking up that you'd like to share, we encourage you to do so here on the live broadcast through our Google Plus page. You have to click, if you're watching on YouTube, where it says be part of the conversation, and then you have to log in with your Google Plus credentials, and then you can post your comment or your question. If you are watching this, the recorded version of the Hangout, you can put your question or your comment in the YouTube video comment section. All right, so Victor and Cerise, I'd like to start off by going straight into this hooking up culture, and what is the mechanisms that drives this culture, and is it different for men and women? So what is it that drives it for men from your perspective, Cerise?
Okay, well, the one aspect is that men do generally have a stronger desire for sex. In part, it's going to be, for some men, or even most men, looking for sexual experiences purely for the sake of doing it. And another aspect is going to be things like peer pressure, where guys kind of hype each other up to the point of boosting each other's egos and telling their stories about their conquests and things like that, where their sexual exploits are used to kind of, shall we say, they kind of become a part of the relationship dynamic between male friends, where it's not just about sharing themselves within a point of friendship, but it's about sharing their experiences in order to appear to be a certain way for each other, and therefore validate each other within their self-definitions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to also ask Victor, is that something that you can relate to from also being a teenager and growing up, that guys would talk in this way? Because maybe as females, we won't often be privy to it, because it kind of exists between guys.
Yeah, well, I would say that in certain circles, that's how it was. In my particular circle of friends, it was more, it wasn't spoken out loud, but there was this, oh, I've been at a party and I met this girl, and then all the rest was like, oh, or like, I want that as well, So there was that competition.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, am I lagging or are you lagging? I'm trying to figure out if I need to drop my bandwidth.
Well, our internet is usually quite stable, but we don't hear a lag coming from you at all.
Okay, all right. Okay, cool. Well then, let's carry on.
But what else would you say is in this drive to go out and hook up?
Okay, so part of it that I kind of mentioned briefly within the dynamic of male friendships is that point of validating self-image. So that brings out the aspect of self-image and self-worth, where someone might believe, and this is true for men as well as for women, where you might value yourself more if you can get more sexual conquests or experiences or whatever, sexual partners, where it's linked into your entire self-definition and your entire self-image, where you do these things to feel good about yourself. But that kind of exists within a polarity, because there's that momentary feel-good rush of, oh, you know, look what I can do, look how I can manipulate people and get them to like me, and look how this is how much people like me. But the other end of that spectrum is a kind of a shame that will come from it of, is this really who I want to be? So it's like there's kind of the superficial surface self, which feels validated by having a lot of sexual partners, versus the deeper, shall we say, just for lack of a better word, the real self, which is questioning whether that is really a valid self experience and a valid way to live. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up the point of self-image and validation. Is there anything that you guys like to add to that particular point?
Yeah, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I can just say that I relate very much to that assessment. And I remember in the gymnasium, and it's the school years in Sweden.
High school.
Yeah, you're about 16 to 19.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like this period when I would go out and meet women only to sort of, and each time I successfully, you know, met a woman, it didn't proceed to the point of sex, but it was like, you know, a recognition, like, well, you're hot or something like that. Mm. It like, oh my God, this is so great. It felt, and then maybe, you know, a month passed or something like that, and then I felt I had to go out and do it again, because somehow, you know, I started to think that, oh my God, am I lagging behind my friends in their sort of sexual conquest? Yeah, so I had to keep up.
Interesting.
Exactly.
So is that, would you say that it's the same for females, Cerise?
I think that a lot of aspects of that are the same, especially when it comes to the self-image, where shall we start with the point of competition within female relationships? The dynamics of a female friendship are a little bit different, because you've got two, let's say, remember, this is generally speaking, so you've got two different kinds of relationships. The one in which females will goad each other on and create an environment of competition around sexuality, and another one where that point of sexuality is suppressed, where they frown on and look down on being sexually promiscuous. So you've got these two kind of prominent dynamics existing in the world. Maybe, shall we say, it's the old generation versus the new generation, where the older generation is more conservative and the new generation is more adventurous, and sometimes, shall we say, they are more promiscuous. So in those dynamics where females are kind of egging each other on, you will get similar dynamics as with the male relationships, where they are kind of creating that push to go out and, you know, be as good as your friends and prove to your friends that you can also do what they do, and that you can hook up with the hottest person in the club or whatever. So that dynamic can exist. But like I said, women generally tend to have self-image problems. So a lot of women do find a kind of a comfort or a boost in self-image when they are recognized or are validated as being attractive by a guy. So that kind of will create a tendency in some women to actively seek that out over and over and over and over again. So that validation will then build on their kind of self-image, make them feel good about themselves, make them feel like they are good looking. Because, I mean, let's face it, in this day and age, that is something that is valued highly, the physical appearance of people, especially women. There are incredibly high standards being promoted in the media. It is something that seems to be changing, which would be lovely, but for now, there is so much conflict created within women about how they look that the coping mechanisms that they tend to use, like hooking up, in order to try and validate themselves as being good enough, are usually quite destructive.
Yeah, it's quite a paradox, hey, with how, because I was just, as you were saying that, I was remembering both from my own experiences and also seeing other females how, and I don't know how much men are aware of this, but how females, when they go out clubbing, for example, obviously with the whole point of hooking up in some way or another being in the back of their head, or even, you know, being outspoken about it, they will stand there and get ready for like hours. You know, they will take, and that will even be part of the ritual of going out, that even before you go out, you will stand there with your girlfriends and try on all this clothes and put on all this makeup and basically try and make yourself more sellable or make yourself more valuable, so that, you know, this guy will get you on his hook, basically. But then at the same time, like you said, we have this new generation where women are becoming more promiscuous, and it's actually seen as like being like sexually aggressive or being very sexually bold, like having sex with more than one guy or having sex in a strange place or something like that, that it's seen as a, obviously, again, this is only in certain circles, but that it's seen as like a point of self-empowerment, where if you as a female can be more like a guy, then it means that you're strong and you're independent. And then females try and kind of become like guys. But then at the same time, there's this whole, you know, dolling yourself up, which actually comes from, like you were saying, a point of lack of self-confidence, and, you know, projecting the value that you have onto your image, and that, you know, some guy has to come along and validate that for it to be real. So that is, I would say that I definitely agree with you that it is very conflictual.
Yeah,
for sure. And I'm not sure if that same conflict exists with men, or if it's in a different way, simply.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect about the female point of view within this is that it's very often not actually about the sex, because of the simple fact that majority of women are not comfortable with themselves, and so are therefore not comfortable in really letting go in their sexual encounters. So a lot of the time it's not about the sex, because the sex isn't any good for the woman. So that proves even more how much it's not actually about the sexual encounter, how there's something else driving a woman. Let's say, for example, the majority of women, especially the women who don't derive sexual pleasure from these encounters, how much is going on behind the scenes that's driving them to do it. Because, I mean, if it's not for the sex, then why? There's definitely hidden aspects going on.
Yeah, I would say that one of those aspects that I've experienced is actually the desire for intimacy, or not, not even necessarily like an actual relationship, but that's how we would interpret it in our minds. But just being with someone, just being close to someone, getting to know someone, being physically, the warmth of another human being. And you don't, as a young person in many situations, you don't know how, like, there are no other situations or social structures in which you can attain that. So it is the clubs, and it is combined with drinking and doing drugs in many cases, if you don't have any other form of access to, to actual meeting another human being and getting to know them, which is kind of a shame, because it could be about so much more than, drinking alcohol and having casual sex with someone.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next point. Anything else that you wanted to add in? What is it that drives the female to go out and look for a hookup?
No, I think you covered the final point that I was to the of the desire for intimacy, which actually we didn't mention earlier, but it can also be a valid point for men, where they also kind of, let's say, suppress their desire for intimacy and act it out through casual sex. So yeah, that's but that pretty much covers it, I think.
Okay, so let's move on to the next point. Something that I've seen in this hooking up culture and the dynamic between men and females, or males and females, especially when it comes to going out and drinking and all of that, is this classic scenario of the hunter and the prey, where the male is supposed to be the hunter and the female is supposed to be the prey. And then we kind of prance around each other, both participating in the game. What would you guys say about this like aspect of the hookup culture?
Well, it's I think that's a very accurate description. These days, let's say that that men and women are starting to swap roles in certain situations of being hunter and prey. It is traditionally the man's role to be the hunter, but there's now a lot of women who are, shall we say, developing themselves to be more, as you put it earlier, be more sexually aggressive. Yeah, so that is something that is evolving at the moment in society. And what's quite interesting about it is that for a lot of people, that part of hooking up, that stalking your prey, that kind of playing that game of hooking someone, is actually maybe the most enjoyable part of the whole thing. See, okay, I spotted my prey, can I get them? And being successful is the highlight of the entire encounter. The sex is just kind of example, or like, okay, well, this is what's expected, I better not let them down, for example. And generally what tends to happen in this whole play out is that you have had your way with your intended target, shall we put it that way. Generally what happens is then that's it, you're done. You never see them again, you talk to them again, you don't think about them again. They are not really another human being to you. They're just this kind of objective idea of one fun evening I had once upon a time type of thing. So that respect kind of dehumanizes people and takes away that real deep connection of two beings sharing themselves with each other, because it's not about that anymore. It's just about playing the game, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I was just looking at that was interesting is that, well, it's just a theory, and I'm sure that there's probably some psychological theory about this, or, you know, I'm probably not the first one who had this idea, but maybe, you know, like you were saying, that the hunt is actually the most enjoyable part of it, and maybe that's even like the most, you could say, why you're actually doing it, like because you want to experience that hunt. So could that have something to do with also the society that we live in, and specifically for males, that there is this like instinctual need, or, you know, for many thousands of years we were used to hunting, we're used to having to hunt, and that actually, you know, created a really cool experience within yourself, and you become very focused, and you know, you have this target and you want results, and then when you finally get it, you know, all of your village is proud of you and you're the man. Like maybe it actually comes from such, you could say, ancient instincts that actually maybe not even have anything to do with sex. It's just an idea, but who knows, you know, what like psychological mechanisms are affecting us, even on an instinctual level.
And
Yeah,
I
think
can
that's
share here because just I have, like you guys say, this is the most like enjoyable part, or that is how you experience it. But like me, as a contrast,
Yeah.
this part was actually the most. I really didn't like this part. I mean, because I was quite shy, so I just wanted to know, okay, the contact part, get that over with, like just fast play it to, you know, when we know each other. And
Yeah. Like, why do I have to do this hunting thing?
yeah, and I also saw that dynamic that was sort of like expected, that okay, now we're gonna play this game. I'm gonna walk over here and gonna play like disinterested. Now I'm interested again. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why is this happening?
Yeah. It's funny you say it, because I met a guy once, like I had known him a couple of years earlier, and then I met him several years later, and I like had the courage to tell him, you know, I actually really liked you back then. And he said to me, you know, I also really liked you. And then it's like, damn, you know, no one said anything, because I was just sitting there, you know, being the good little prey, just sitting and waiting until maybe he would, but maybe he was like, you know, he was shy. And so nothing ever really came about it, because neither of us, or well, maybe I was playing the game, but maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have actually taken the courage to say, hey, I want to get to know you better.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting dynamic there, because what then is driving the game to take place? I mean, why don't people just go up to each other and say, I find you attractive, would you like to sleep with me? You know, why play the game? And I think a big part of it is fear of rejection. You're constantly testing the waters, seeing, okay, is this person interested? Aren't they? How interested are they? It's like kind of an advance and retreat, which is, interestingly enough, also a very primitive approach.
Yes.
You know, you see it in the animal world a lot. This kind of tippy-toeing type of thing, testing the waters the whole time. So that fear of rejection links right back into self-image, because it becomes about, if this person doesn't like me, it makes me feel crap about myself, and I'm not being validated. I don't feel good about myself. I must be an unattractive, unappealing person. And it's interesting how those negative experiences will stick so much better than any of the positive experiences. That will become the mantra of, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And everyone is walking around the world trying to find a way to get people to tell them that they are good enough, whether it's through sex or through achievements or whatever. And that fear of being actually faced with the possibility that, oh no, someone actually is now telling me, or even if they're not actually telling you, or let's say they're rejecting your advances, they're confirming that I'm not good enough. That's then what it's all about. It's all about, how do I see myself? And it's it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, where because people are dependent, or they are depending on other people to validate themselves, at some point, or shall I rather say that it's never really actually going to happen, because in a way you never actually believe that the other person is validating you. There's always this disbelief that, okay, they have accepted my advances, but maybe they don't actually really feel that way, because you can't see into another person's mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That point of doubt of, yes, so they've agreed to sleep with me tonight, but is that really, you know, what do they actually really think of me? That question of what's really going on in the other person is always there. And the human tendency is to create a total mind spin around that point, that what if, and turn it into a point of confirming to yourself that actually I'm not good enough, even though that and that and that has happened.
Because that was the point you started with, you know, that you were trying to get away from. So it kind of comes full circle. You're eventually going to end up back there again because you never really dealt with it. And you know what's interesting is that I've been talking to a couple of people recently who are in relationships, and some of them, you know, they've maybe been in a relationship with someone for an entire year, and then they would say things like, you know, I don't know what he feels about having children, or I don't know, you know, if he really loves me, for example. And I would think, that's really strange. Like, you've been together for an entire year, and it sounds like you don't even communicate, that you don't even know where each other stands. And I mean, the only reason that I would think this now is because I'm now in a relationship where we do communicate. But up until now, I mean, that's how it is, you know. So you even have even several years into a relationship, unless there's like an explicit commitment, you can have that, oh no, you know, is he gonna be with someone else? Maybe he's cheating, I better check his phone. Like, that doubt can go on for years and years, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's actually a really sad reality. That
it's tragical.
That so many relationships are so distrustful, and that is, you know, primarily due to people not knowing how to communicate openly, in such a way that it's a point of sharing. Because if it was coming from a point of sharing, I'm sharing myself and I am accepting your sharing, then that question of what's really going on fades away, because that openness is authentic. There's no way that you can fake that. You know, when you're really sharing yourself with someone, you know it and they know it. And in society today, it's actually so rare to find people who know how to just let go and say, this is who I am, and this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling.
Absolutely.
I mean, that would then be linking into that whole aspect of playing the game, because no one knows how to be authentic.
Yeah. And then also to be successful at hunting, or even being hunted, because you have to do, you know, as a female being hunted, it has a lot to do with, or even for male as well, it has a lot to do with strategic body language. You know, the way that you present yourself, the way that you move your eyes, and you have to either know that instinctively, or you have to develop those skills. And like you were saying, Victor, it didn't come natural to you, and then you think that there's something wrong with you, because this is the only, you could say, arena, or like I was talking about before, it's the only scenario that you have available to you to find someone else to be with. And then it's like, okay, then there must be something wrong with me, when in fact the other people, they either have it instinctually or they have been practicing. And now you can even take these, you know, courses or read these books on how to hooking up with women, where they will tell you, like, this is how you need to sit, and that's what you say, and 5 minutes after you leave. And So what else have you guys seen in terms of what goes into this whole preparing for the hunt, and also how men and women approach it differently?
Let's see. Okay, so we did touch on, I think, Anna, you touched on a little bit the point of preparation and the point of body language. And like you said, women will actually spend hours getting ready to make sure they look a certain way in order to convey the right message that they are wanting to convey. And now the whole male metrosexual scene is also increasing. So men are also spending more time preparing themselves and choosing what they're going to wear. And this is part of the, let's say it's the beginning stages of the game where you're preparing for the arena. And the next phase would be being in a club, for example, and then setting up the space and creating the scenario in which you can get someone. So you know, maybe a guy will be buying drinks for girls, dancing together, whatever. And what's interesting is that very rarely is there any emotion involved in any of these things. It's not like lovey-dovey, fluttery feelings happening all the time. It's quite business-like, actually. It's cold and calculated.
Very strategic.
It's like you walk into the scenario with a particular goal, and you make sure that you do everything you need to do to reach your goal, which is targeting someone and successfully completing your mission. And a big part of this would be a very objective self-assessment, because, like you said, in order to play the game, you need to know. So you need to be able to look at yourself and say, okay, this is what I need to improve on. I need to back down on that aspect a little bit. My clothes need to be adjusted in that way. I need to maybe, you know, hold eye contact a little bit longer. It becomes quite, you become quite skilled at looking at your behavior and assessing other people's behavior in order to suss out, you know, how successful you're being and how you can improve your tactics. So it's quite an interesting part of the whole game, is that very, I think strategic is a very good word. It's a very strategic approach to accomplishing a particular set of goals.
Yeah, and I can add there that there is actually a book that's called The Game. And I remember when I was around 16 to 19 that my friend read this book, and then he started to apply these principles. That, for example, you know, that the main thing in these books is actually that you're successful in the game when you abuse women emotionally. Like, that's how it works, because then the woman, and probably on a more deeper level, she like this urge for acceptance awakens. But what I found back then was that I had a resistance towards this, you know, applying these principles, because I could see that that there was no authenticity in it. Like, it was just, you know, I want to have sex with this woman, and I'm not going to share anything of myself. It's just a facade. And when I get what I want, you know, then I'll leave that woman. So, yeah.
Interesting. So you were actually too real to be able to do, like, you know, because you basically have to be fake. You have to, and you, so I mean, that's actually quite a cool thing, that, you know, naturally you were able to keep your integrity, but then unfortunately it means that, sorry, then you can't participate. You know, that's not cool, that it has to be like that. That either you have to be fake and brutal and cold, or you just don't get any.
But Victor actually mentions a very interesting point that a lot of the time what's involved is a honing in of other people's weaknesses and using them against them in order to manipulate them into being more agreeable to you and sleeping with you, for example. So that can be one of the more nasty aspects of this whole construct, that willingness to exploit other people emotionally for a very fleeting moment of personal satisfaction. So yeah, that's just an aspect I wanted to share.
Yeah, I'd like to also talk a little bit more about the consequences on ourselves and our relationships that, you know, our participation in the hookup culture has. But I also wanted to mention this point of how I've at least seen in this, you could say, in the modern culture, where it's not black and white, with the male being the hunter and the female being the prey, that a lot of males are experiencing themselves extremely frustrated and disempowered, where, for example, females on online dating profiles, you know, if a female creates an online dating profile, they'll get like 10 messages a day, you know, easily. Like, so as a female, if you decide to go and start finding a partner, you can very easily, you know, do it. And you can, in a certain way, you can just like lean back and then it comes to you, because that's the nature of this traditional game. And so I've spoken to quite a lot of males that were extremely frustrated, to the point where they would blame women. And this was like males who were not successful at it, who did not have this skill of going out and hooking up. So is that something that you guys have seen as well?
Absolutely.
That also that power dynamic can shift, you know, where the victim, or you could say the prey, actually has the power.
Sorry, Anna, you just broke up there for a moment. Could you just repeat the last part?
Yeah, that I was saying that these guys feel very disempowered and feel like, you know, the females has the power, and then it goes into this point of blame. And I'm not sure, I mean, this is not something that I've investigated, but I could imagine that it could potentially lead eventually to rape, which is not, you know, to blame the females, but more like that this disempowerment, if you don't know how to do it and you see females, you know, putting themselves on display, like, I can imagine that it could be very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, that I definitely have seen this happen a lot in the world. It's really sad. That's the first thing, because our society has been constructed in such a way where there are only a few winners and everyone else is a loser, you know. And it applies very much to this dating game, where you have to, in this world that we've created, you have to be a certain way in order to be able to play a game. And for those who are excluded because of something that they do not possess, not of their own volition, let's say they're born looking a certain way, like we've said before, this world very highly values physical appearance. So if someone is born and they're not, in the traditional sense, attractive or appealing to other people, and as well as that, they also don't have the charismatic skills of playing the game, they're left in a position where, like you said, Anna, they're completely disempowered. There's no way for them to do what everyone else is doing. And what generally tends to happen is a very repetitive rejection over and over and over again. They get excluded, they get deliberately left out. They very often also get very nasty feedback from other people, which, you know, I mean, no one enjoys being left out. And especially no one enjoys being told that they're worthless or being told that they're ugly, whatever. It's not a good experience for anyone. And there are so many people who are in that experience simply because they were born with a particular something that doesn't means that they don't fit in with today's norms of what is required to participate. And like you said, it can be extremely frustrating. I mean, how many kids turn to suicide or violent actions or porn, you know, finding comfort in porn, and even in extreme cases, rape, because, you know, realistically, there's not very much support in this world. You know, if you can't afford to be a psychologist, for example, what are you going to do? Further to that, if you're not willing to go to someone for help, it's not like you can just ask your parents. And further to that, it's not like your parents actually prepare you for things like this, or shall we say 99.9% of parents. So you're left sitting in the situation which feels like everything is out of your hands. You hate yourself because everyone hates you. You have these urges that are, shall we say, natural, and you have no way of expressing them in a constructive and supportive manner because essentially the world has rejected you. What do you do there? I mean, at this point, I can't say that there's an easy answer, aside from someone being able to overcome all of that and find a place where they can be at peace with themselves. And quite interestingly enough, what often happens from that peace and from that real self-acceptance, it usually creates the space to develop relationships. You know, it draws people in. So that's an interesting dynamic that quite often happens. But yeah, I mean, I'd say that this is definitely a big issue in the world, especially in Western cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that combined with loneliness that we also briefly talked about here before the hangout. We've actually talked about that the next hangout that we will do as a natural continuation on this one will be about dating, and, you know, which you could say is like a different aspect. Instead of hooking up, you know, then you have the dating culture, which may be more traditional, or it could also be a more supportive solution if you do want to hook up and you don't know how to do it. So I definitely suggest to keep an eye on our schedule and see when we'll be doing that hangout, if it is something that you've been experiencing struggles with. Did you want to add something in relation to this?
Yeah, so I mean, in relation to this point with, you know, and now being an outcast and looking for support. So from my own experience and what I've shared earlier is that I did struggle with shyness. And I remember at one point being like, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I sat down and I asked my father about it. So, you know, I'm very shy around women, you know, what should I do? And it was fun because my father was like, you know, he didn't really know what to do. So he said something, well, you just gotta, you know, go speak with them. But so it's interesting to see, like you mentioned, Cerise, how like there's so little support for these points that are so normal in people. Like there are so many that are shy. It's still, you go to, you know, you turn to your parents, they won't know how to support you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a solution that I see is that we that do have the tools and that have, you know, walked these points for ourselves, that at least we'll be able to support our children when that day comes, and also our friends, for example.
Sure.
So,
yeah,
like we can build in that support, for example, in family structures, in friendships, and things like that.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Victor.
Cerise, were there any other consequences? Because now we've talked about the point of when you don't know how to hook up and how that can affect you, but were there other consequences that you've seen that you see would be relevant to open up here?
Yeah, we have kind of touched on it in the other previous points that we've discussed, but one of the very big effects of this game is the effects that it has on the person or the people that you are playing the game with. So let's say, for example, you are hooking up with someone who maybe isn't as well equipped to deal with the game as you are. The whole scenario of using them for your personal satisfaction and then dumping them can actually have serious emotional consequences on that person. I mean, they're left feeling used and abused and abandoned, as well as, you know, then being forced to look back and see exactly what was done to them in order to get to the point of the sex, for example. So, you know, they get to a point where they actually will see, I've been manipulated, I was lied to, I was, that person used my weakness, they manipulated me into feeling emotionally vulnerable, and from that, in that moment of, shall we say, weakness, I went to them as to try and seek solace, to try and seek some kind of support, and then they just left me. You know, that it creates those experiences within people, and as well as that, in the beginning I mentioned that kind of that inner self, that shame of, wow, is this really how I want to live, and is this really the world I want to be participating in?
Yeah.
A lot of the time, you know, I'm sure that most people can relate to doing something that you know isn't actually really all that cool or all that good for you, but doing it anyway. That in itself, that I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I've been doing it anyway, that in itself creates a huge source of shame and self-judgment and self-hatred, all sorts of things like that. So not only are you affecting your own inner experiences and your own thought patterns and your own self-image, but you're influencing, you're touching a lot of people's lives, you know, you're influencing a lot of people's realities, should we put it that way. So it's not like it's innocent, it's not like there's no consequences, there are consequences. And sadly, a lot of people don't see, or if they do see, they don't really care.
Yeah.
Which you know, is part of this whole individualistic and self-centered society that we are living in, that we've created, that as long as I get what I want, it doesn't matter who I hurt. And that's essentially a very big part of what this whole construct is about, of personal satisfaction, personal enjoyment, no matter what the cost.
Yeah, I mean, even for many people, it can even become like a lifestyle, whether for months or even for years, where your entire week, you could say you have like a cycle revolving around going out, getting drunk, doing drugs, and hooking up, and where it's like this build-up towards this illusion or delusion of attaining something, you know, getting this like ultimate sexual experience, or, you know, another, you could say another mark in your list of sexual conquests. Or for women, it could be, you know, this constant perpetual search for, intimacy and relationships. And then, you know, that becomes like this up and down, where you have Monday to Friday, your normal boring life, and then it goes up, 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 up in this like fantasy. And then you have this sex, and then you wake up Sunday morning or Saturday morning or Monday morning, and it's just empty and gray. And instead of being filled up, instead of being whole, you know, like that whole, you know, we're unconscious about it, but there's this like drive towards, you know, this ultimate experience of being complete and whole and satisfied and happy and having what you want. And then instead you know, it's kind of like you land back in your, sorry my language, your shitty life, and then the whole thing starts over again.
Yep.
I mean, that is definitely also sad. And then sad also that people remain in those cycles, that then becomes the solution. Like you were saying, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like you were saying also, Victor, then after a month or after a week, you have to go and do it again, because you believe that this is where, you know, the Holy Grail exists, instead of looking inwards, or instead of seeing the beauty in more like simplistic conversations with other people. Maybe you even miss real moments of opportunity because you weren't, you know, you weren't aware of them, or you weren't seeing them.
Very well said, Anna.
So let's, here before we finish, we have about 9 minutes left. Let's look a little bit of the solutions. So if someone has now been listening to our Hangout today and has been participating in this hookup culture, and from what we've shared here, have realized that it's actually not something that I want to do, what can they do? And what can the person do that has been wanting to participate but hasn't been able to?
Well, step one is to stop playing the game, which means for people, it might mean having to reevaluate their entire lifestyle, because like you said, Anna, for a lot of people this becomes a lifestyle. It becomes, you know, a daily or a weekly thing that people actively choose to do. So step one is to look at, okay, how can I change the way that I'm living? First of all, stop doing it the way I've been doing it. Then I'd say what is very important is to look within yourself to see, why have you been doing what you've been doing? What has been driving you? Is it a point of self-validation? Is it a point of sexual desire? Is it a concoction of a whole lot of points? Find out exactly what it is you are looking for within your behavior, because those are the points that you need to find a way to give to yourself without having to resort to, for example, playing this game, where you can, if intimacy is something you seek, where you can then start creating connections with people and creating intimacy, but real intimacy, sustainable intimacy that can be that can go deeper, that can get you to a point where you're truly sharing yourself and you are accepting someone else within their sharing. So that self-assessment of, why have I been doing what I've been doing, is very important in order to see what you need to actually really create in your life and create for yourself. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that you can change, that you can start giving yourself what you're lacking, but essentially all of them will require you coming to a point where you can make peace with yourself, where you can reach a point of shall we say self-acceptance, where you're not trying to find someone to give you some experience, where you're at a point where you can give that experience to yourself, or if not give it to yourself, where you can create it within your life, where you can create it constructively, and not from that point of destruction and breaking down, where you can build something.
Yeah, because then being with someone else becomes something that adds something to your life and not something that you're willing to compromise yourself and your body for. And I was also going to say, with the last point we talked about with the consequences, that there are also a lot of physically and, you know, potentially dangerous consequences to the hookup culture, especially when it's involving alcohol and drugs and what we're willing to do with our bodies. And let our bodies go through, whether we are male or female. Whereas if you are, you know, rested in yourself, or how you can say, at rest with yourself, then you won't go to that point of being willing to, you know, throw your body into something that might be potentially dangerous for you or for the other person, just to get that point of validation.
Yeah.
And then I'd also quickly, sorry, go ahead, Therese.
Just wanted to mention the one point that I don't think we have mentioned, but it's in relation to the physical consequences, but sexually transmitted diseases is a big one. I mean, what is it? I think it's gonorrhea that is now becoming resistant to antibiotics, and it's becoming harder and harder to cure. And a lot of people have it because they are having unprotected sex with strangers. And, you know, it's just hopping from person to person. And eventually we're going to get to a point where it can't be cured. And then what do? You know,
it's also not a very effective way of exploring your sexuality, because it's like every time you're starting over, you know, if you have one night stands, you know, you're only with that person for a few hours, you're not even getting to know them, and then you have to, you know, now suddenly be physically intimate with them and, you know, have this magical, wonderful sex. And I mean, let's admit it, how often is it actually that happens?
Not very often.
Not very often. So, well, anyway, we will come back and we will talk a lot more about this. And next, in the next hangout, we'll talk about dating. And I would say, because here in Scandinavia, we don't have really dating as a concept, as where the guy asks the girl out and then they go to dinner or in the movies. So when we talk about dating, you know, we mean a way of meeting a partner or a potential partner in a way that is not just clubbing and alcohol and drugs, you could say, but where it's a more relaxed, but it could also be formal, like in the sense of an actual, like a blind date, or, you know, I think that's more like a cultural difference, that we don't have that type of dating here. We
go for coffee.
It will more be like hanging out with someone. But we can talk more about that aspect. And I would say to anyone who has this experience of being isolated and, like Victor, not wanting to participate in the whole hunting, or just, like, you know, admitting to yourself, I am just not no good at it. What I would recommend is starting with a hobby. You know, if you like kayaking, or you like golfing, or whatever, or even if you don't, but you might think you may do, that is a really cool way to meet people, where you see them like once a week, week after week, and it's very casual, very relaxed, no pressure. You can actually get to know the real person and see them in a real active situation where you're doing something together. But we can talk about that much more in the next hangout. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That's a really good suggestion. And I know it's been suggested to me, for example, dancing, or dancing.
Yes. Yeah. Any last words from you, Cerise, on the solution?
No, I can't think of anything at the moment.
All right. So we invite you to send us an email at desteniiprocess@gmail.com, or post a comment or a question to this video, and then we will bring it with us when we meet. And we're actually meeting not that far from this date, because we had like a 20-day delay on this hangout. So we will actually be seeing each other again. Let me just quickly check the date. Does anyone else has it?
Yeah, the 7th of May. So it's not this week Thursday, not next week Thursday, but following Thursday.
In 3 weeks. So if all goes according to plan, we will be meeting then. I do suggest to follow us here on YouTube, as well as follow us on the DIP Lite Facebook page, because that's where we post when we'll be doing the Hangouts. So keep an eye on that. And then, of course, subscribe to our channel if you want to watch more of these videos. We have an entire series, so you can, in the YouTube description of this video, you'll be able to see the playlist with all the previous videos in this Hangout series. So Cerise and Victor, thank you so much for being here. Very interesting discussion. And oh, I just forgot to mention that we have a comment here from Andres, and he's saying, cool guys, thank you for your perspective. Thanks for watching, Andres and everyone else, and we will be back in roughly about 3 weeks. Bye everyone.